Many people believe that everything happens for a reason. I think this sentiment's related to a fundamental trust that God is in control and that human lives are neither random nor meaningless. Sometimes we draw on this belief as we try to make sense of tragedy. I certainly hope that none of us views his or her life as utterly ungrounded or untethered from God's care, but actually believing that God is pulling every string, or that everything that happens is ultimately good, is fraught with enormous difficulties. What about human freedom? Does not sin mean that I have chosen against God's will and that I've opted for chaos and not divine order? Such a dictum can also lead us to seek reasons for incidents that have no reason, especially tragedies or horrifying moral evil. Having said this, we can still take divine providence seriously. That is, we ought to believe that God is in fact guiding our lives, the church, and indeed the world, toward his purposes. Consider it big picture providence. But big picture providence does not mean that God is not intimately part of our lives here and now. The twofold confidence that God is here with us, as well as broadly drawing all things to his ends, are what today's scriptures witness to. In today's gospel reading, Jesus offers two comparisons about planting and fruition. In the first, he compares our experience of the kingdom of God to the experience of a farmer who scatters seeds, and later, without understanding how it happens, finds the seeds grown to produce a harvest. In the second, he compares the kingdom to a mustard seed, which is among the smallest seeds, but produces an unusually large bush. I don't know how God's grace works. Sometimes I craft what I consider a perfect talk and get a ho-hum response. At other times, a side comment of mine produces a revelation for somebody who tells me later and then thanks me for that insight that changed their life. This does not mean, of course, that I have a license to be slack in my preparations as if it didn't matter. But it does mean that I'm not in control of the kingdom. None of us are. We should always aspire to please God, and this means being intentional and responsible. Beyond that, we scatter seeds and can only be surprised by how things come to fruition. We can also nurture hope that small beginnings can have amazing outcomes. Jesus' ministry must have looked like a disaster to an outsider. He converted very few who heard him, and even his disciples remained relatively clueless throughout his ministry. But of course, his ministry brought about the salvation of the world. The kingdom is God's providence in action.